Is ESG negotiable? That is the topic of the keynote. Hello, my name is Keld, and I've been invited to talk to you about ESG and negotiation. And the question is, can you negotiate ESG? I'll get back to that in a second. But before we start talking about that, I want to share something else with you. And that is, before we start discussing whether we can negotiate or renegotiate ESG, we actually have to talk about to reinvent the way we negotiate. And the reason I'm saying that is basically because we've been negotiating the wrong way for many, many years. And by the wrong way, I mean basically in a way where you lose at the expense of the counterpart or I win at your expense. So that means that we can only make progress for one. What I've been claiming for years is that we're basically still negotiating like we did back in the 1850s. And that's obviously something of a claim. But what I mean by that is, as we speak right now, hundreds of thousands of negotiations are wasted. And a wasted negotiation, what is that in reality? Well, a wasted negotiation can be a lot of different things. So what is a wasted negotiation? A wasted negotiation could be if we have two parties who are sitting negotiating with each other, and you and I know, looking at it from the side, that these two parties are actually capable of reaching an agreement that would be better off for both of them. But they don't. So they leave the conference room, go back to the management and tell the management this was impossible. We couldn't find a way. There wasn't variables. There wasn't room. The counterpart didn't want to be flexible. Lots of different excuses. So they don't feel it was possible to reach an agreement, but in reality, it was, and it would have been a better outcome. That's one way of looking at a wasted negotiation. The other way of looking at a wasted negotiation is that the two parties actually managed to reach an agreement, but they only realized 58% of the value in this negotiation. Now, this is what I call negotiation economics, or short negoeconomics, the asymmetric value that exists between two parties. And one of the many, many problems and challenges we have in the world today is that way too many negotiations are happening that way. That means the parties are basically negotiating what I call in a zero-sum behavior, in a positional negotiation behavior. And I can best illustrate that with the slide that you can see up here right now, where you basically have soldiers lying in the trench pointing the rifle towards each other. This is a zero-sum negotiation. What is negotiation economics or negoeconomics? Well, I have a short video that will basically describe in detail how we find that asymmetric value, the difference between the benefit and the cost. Now, this small animation video will just show you very quickly that one of the variables out of hundreds of variables that could generate negoeconomics could be found in terms of payment. Enjoy the animation. I'll be back in a minute.
Mark is a supplier who's been negotiating with Sophia, who's the buyer. They've agreed on everything and signed a contract for $50 million. Mark returns home to his HQ satisfied from the meeting with Sophia, only to learn that his company are lacking cash. In order to fulfill the order to Sophia, they will need to prepay sub-suppliers $15 million in order to get the essential components they need to deliver the complete solution to Sophia. And they haven't got $15 million. Mark realizes that they only have two options. One, they can go to Sophia and ask if she's willing to make an upfront payment of $15 million. Two, they can go to their bank and ask if the bank wants to lend them $15 million. Mark calls Sophia the next day to ask for the upfront payment. Mark: Hi Sophia, thank you so much for the contract. I appreciate the order. However, I got a great idea. Why don't you pay $15 million up front? That would be great. Sophia denies the request. Mark is forced to negotiate with the bank. The bank agrees to lend him $15 million. The total cost for Mark's company lending the money from the bank is $550,000. Sophia is sitting in her office thinking, what a great agreement I've got. By not paying $15 million up front, I save my company $150,000. Even though we are good on cash, it's still a project saving. My boss is going to be happy. Mark feels he got a bad deal on the terms of payment. Sophia feels she got a great deal. But in reality, none of them did well. They both lost on the potential negoeconomics. Mark lost $550,000. Sophia gained $150,000. The negoeconomic sum is $400,000 that just flew out of the window. What could they have done instead? Mark could have reduced his price by $300,000. By doing that, he would reduce his loss by 250,000, and Sophia would have gained 150,000.
Now, what have all of this got to do with ESG? It has a lot to do with ESG, because when you're working in zero sum, if you're doing an RFP dash a tender and go out to the market and say, well, we want delivery in 4 weeks, you don't consider the cost to the counterpart. You don't consider the expense. You don't consider the impact on climate. All you look at is my benefit of receiving something in 4 weeks is X. But imagine for a second, guys, that the supplier's cost of supplying in 4 weeks is way higher than your benefit. Let's assume that they would save $1 million by delivering in 5 weeks, and your loss would only be 200,000 if you delayed delivery 1 week. The difference between the counterpart's benefit and your value is obviously 800,000, and that is necroeconomics. And the same thing can happen when we talk about ESG. When we put up a variable and we demand something from the counterpart, we don't consider the value, the cost, the benefit, the risk, and all of these issues, including ESG. So when we look at the way we traditionally conduct negotiations today, it's actually bad for the ESG variables as well, because often we don't know what the counterpart wants, what the risk might be, what the value might be, what they would like to achieve. So we're basically looking for a black cat in a very dark room. Now, just before we dive in with a live example that I brought, it's an actual negotiation that just happened. I would like just to show you a comic strip that really illustrate the problem with some of the issues involved in ESG. As you can see on the screen right now, we have a presenter who's standing on stage, and what he's saying is that climate change threatens our existence. As you can see, the audience is sitting there and falling asleep because it's not really something that grabs their attention. Now, the poor presenter up here, he gets frustrated, so he raised that text and then he writes a new text, and the new text says, climate change threatens our economy. And suddenly, the whole room is awake and engaged and involved. So I'm sad to say that we have to combine ESG and economics in commercial negotiation. Otherwise, we cannot excite our own organization, and we cannot excite the counterpart either. Now, the great news, guys, is that we can actually capitalize variables in a negotiation. Like the example I just gave you, moving delivery a week could give a benefit to one side and present a cost to the counterpart. And imagine for a second, guys, that we can actually improve our negotiation by 42%, and on top of that, even improve climate. Wouldn't that just be amazing? Now, just to illustrate that, I brought along a real-life negotiation that just happened, actually. And this was a negotiation that happened between two major public organizations. One of them is a Swedish public company by the name of Heimstaden. And they are a real estate developer that owns hundreds of thousands of apartments in more than 10 different countries. Now, obviously, they have an interest in making those apartments as nice as possible for the renters. So what they're doing is they went out to the market and looked for potential supplier of kitchens, because kitchens is obviously something you want in an apartment. And one of the bidders, one of the companies that was interested in supplying kitchens to Heimstaden, was a company by the name of Nobia, which is another public company and one of Europe's biggest kitchen manufacturers with lots of different brands and representing in lots of different countries. And just to summarize this deal, this contract that they were negotiating, this contract had an annual contract value of about $30 million. It should cover 2,600 apartments every year, and you can multiply all of this by 6 years, obviously. The cost reduction was one thing that has a huge interest to Heimstaden, not a big surprise. But on the other hand, both parties had a strong interest in actually reducing the carbon footprint connected to this agreement, because obviously it takes a lot of production resources, it takes a lot of impact carbon footprint by manufacturing a kitchen. And Nobia, the manufacturer, was open and willing to look at the whole process to see what could be optimized. What happened in this negotiation is that we basically have 7 different variables that you can see on the screen right now. Price was one of them. Terms of payment was another one. Transportation was the third one. Change of tabletop material was a variable that Nobia threw in there. So because I'm getting back to that in a second, they actually figured out we could make both from environmental reductions and savings and financial savings by actually changing tabletop material. By changing the tabletop size, traditionally, you have always delivered a kitchen in a certain tabletop size, which was standard due to production optimizations. They could improve that. The measurement was a part of the whole process, and design and the order process was a variable that the two parties looked at the same time again. So what did they actually find in this negotiation? Well, they identified that traditionally, this type of kitchen that Heimstaden, the buyer had an interest in, was traditionally always produced out of laminate. Laminate is, as probably you know, a pretty cheap and not that long-lasting material. What happened was that Nobia actually discovered that they could replace laminate with composite because they had a supplier who actually produced composite material and used it for something else, the kitchen. And they had a spare leftover of these composite materials that otherwise would be thrown out and wasted. And Nobia discovered that they could actually utilize that composite material to produce kitchen tables instead of the traditional laminate they've always been used. Now, composite was typically almost double the price of laminate, but it had a higher quality. So the lifetime of a composite tabletop is almost 25 years, while laminate typically would be about 10 years. So it was a waste product from a different product not related to kitchens. And these modules, as I just said, were otherwise supposed to go to waste. So not only were Nobia able to offer a higher quality product, but they were able to offer it at a lower price at about 50%. So that was one variable. It was a variable that not only created a savings financially, but it also made a huge savings when we look at the carbon footprint imprint. Because what happens right now, they utilize the wasted product that otherwise would have been thrown out. So that was a win-win-win, win for the buyer, win for the supplier, and a win for the environment. What they also looked at was that due to the smaller dimension of that tabletop, because it was in smaller dimension than the original laminate, they could reduce delivery by 1 truck to each kitchen installation. And remember, guys, we are talking about 2,600 kitchens per year. So by that, they could not only reduce the cost of transportation, they could reduce employee cost, obviously, because you don't need that many employees when you only do half of the originally planned transportation. And again, you had an environmental savings by not having this truck going back and forth all the time. So they could reduce transportation requirement and cost by about 50%, and they could reduce the environmental impact by 3.85 kilo CO2 per tabletop, multiplied by 2,600 kitchens per year. So yet another variables that was a win-win-win, a win for the buyer, a win for the supplier, and a win for the environment. What we also learned was traditional contractors have refused to do measurement prior to installation of the kitchen. Don't ask me why, but it was always like that. So the contractors on the building side didn't want to do measurements. But Nobia managed to convince the contractors who were out there on the building site already to do the measurement, so they don't have to send out one of their employees to do the measurement. And by doing that, obviously, that would save Nobia a person's visits to each apartment. And I remind you once again, 2,600 apartments per year, since the contractor were already in the apartment doing other stuff. And the savings would be about $180 per unit, multiplied by 2,600, which would total about $500,000. Another thing that they realized doing this was they were able to reduce the transportation requirement for each apartment, as I just said, with approximately 50%. So what happened in this case was the parties agreed to one standard model setup for each kitchen. So that means they wouldn't reinvent the wheel every time a kitchen had to be installed. And by doing that, just having one standard model that would be the model that would be utilized in all of these kitchens, That would save Nobia design and time to create a proposal on each single installation, which was a time saving of approximately $150 per unit, multiplied by 2,700 kitchens per year, which would be a total of approximately 390,000. So what we're looking at right now is the solution in this case was a change of tabletop material that would save not only cost on material, it would save a product or material that otherwise would be thrown out. So we had a positive impact on environmental issues. The renter, the person who would live in the apartment, would actually be living with a product that was way better, would live longer. The buyer saved on purchasing cost, and the supplier had a saving as well. By changing the tabletop size, they saved on transportation. They actually saved on labor cost by doing this by doing transportation on a smaller tabletop size. And by changing the design and order process, Nobia saved internal time, obviously. They changed the setup of measurement. So that means that measurement was suddenly done by the contractor who was already on the building site. So that means it wasn't something that you have to send out specifically a worker to do. So not only, again, are you saving cost and labor, you're also saving transportation costs. And terms of payment were changed. And altogether, this made a economic savings of approximately $1 million per year, plus a huge environmental savings as well. So what you're actually witnessing right now is two parties who renegotiated a deal and including ESG. By doing that, they managed to capitalize the value of ESG. And by capitalizing the value of ESG, it was a motivation to include climate and environmental changes as well. So I'm very impressed and very proud of these two parties actually managed to mature negotiation and moving away from a very traditional RFP. In the old days, we would have seen Heimstaden going out with an RFP. They would have received proposals from 4, 5, 6 different suppliers. They would have picked the one they felt was the cheapest, and there wouldn't be any consideration for the counterpart's cost, risk, and there would certainly not be any focus on any ESG items in a negotiation or any kind of deal focusing or based on a zero-sum negotiation. So that was my 2 cents on ESG and negotiations. So there's a potential, huge potential to negotiate ESG. Should it be negotiated? Absolutely. But often, I have to say, just to be realistic, we have to combine it with economics. Because if we can even motivate a financial benefit, like in this case, by implementing ESGs, everybody's involved, everybody's motivated, and everybody is geared to actually find the best possible outcome. I hope it was useful. Thank you so much for inviting me, and enjoy your day. Thank you.